Assalamualaikum. This is the online video for chapter 5 titled Overhead. So as usual, before we begin the class, please make sure you have your textbook and your past years in front of you as a reference. This shall be our presentation outlines. We start off with introduction, direct allocation and apportionment of overhead, method of absorption, under and over absorption of overhead. So what is overhead? So if you still recall your chapter 1 and chapter 2 under the cost statements, we have encountered overhead previously. Okay, we know that prime costs, which is the all of the direct costs, plus with the indirect costs, which also known as overhead, and we get the total cost. So overhead we can further classify under the manufacturing overhead and the non-manufacturing overhead. So manufacturing overhead is also known as production overhead or factory overhead. It is all indirect product costs incurred in the production or while we make the product. Examples of manufacturing overhead are indirect material, direct labor, and indirect expenses. For the non-manufacturing overhead, these are the costs that are not manufacturing overhead. So they are also known as period costs. While the costs are not allocated to the product, the selling price must be sufficient to cover both product costs and period costs in order to avoid loss. So when we set our selling price, we must make sure that the selling price that we have set cover not only the prime cost but also the manufacturing overhead plus the non-manufacturing overhead. So example of non-manufacturing overhead are administrative costs, selling and distribution, and then we also have the finance cost, the research and development cost, so on and so forth. So the next subsection of chapter 5 is the calculation of the overhead itself under the direct allocation and apportionments of overhead. So before we can start calculating, you need to understand how overhead is being allocated or apportioned. Okay, so let's say that this company have four departments, which also can be known as 4 cost centers. But the first 2 departments here are the departments that produce product. For example, production cost center A, they produce product A, and then the company has the second production cost center which produce product B. And then to support the production process, the company has 2 service departments here to service all of the departments. For example, let's say the service cost center A is an administrative department and service cost center B is a store department. So when you see this kind of departments, you can see that production cost center A and B has their own final product which they can allocate the cost per unit. However, service cost center A and B has no final product to assign the cost that they have incurred. Okay, so when we want to calculate overhead, there are 4 stages that you need to be made aware of. Okay, the first stage is the direct allocations, which means that the expenses have been allocated directly to each of the department. So direct allocation can be for product department A, department B, department C. Department A for service center and department B for service center. Okay. And then there are also costs that are shared among all departments, meaning that the cost is given in the lump sum manner, which is not directly allocated to each of the department. Okay, so you need to apportion them accordingly. Then we need to reapportion the cost, meaning that we need to transfer cost in service cost center A and service cost center B. We need to transfer them to production center A, production center B. Okay, since service cost center doesn't have final product, all costs incurred by them must be allocated to production cost, so that the company can assign the cost in the finished good as cost per unit. So once we have reapportioned the cost to production A and production B, we can get the total cost for production A, total cost for production B, that consists not only their own costs, but also the cost from the service center that we have reapportioned. And then we absorb the overhead for us to calculate the cost per unit. Okay, so to make it clearer, okay, so let's look at June 2019, question 4A. Umairah Berhad produces schools garments. It has 2 production departments and 2 service departments. Budgeted overhead costs for year 2019 with the additional data are as follows. So you can see in the question, it has given you 2 types of department, the production department and the service department. Under production department, the company has 2 categories or 2 departments, which are cutting and finishing, whereas service department has 2 departments, which are the maintenance and store. So the question has given you the allocated indirect material, which you can see the overhead has already been directly allocated to each of the department. Okay, and then they also have given you the unallocated overhead. Here you can see, which you need to appropriate later on using the basis, the most suitable basis. So let's see how we answer this question. Okay, so the question asks you to prepare the overhead analysis sheet using the suitable basis. So this is how overhead analysis sheet looks like. Okay, and the capital letter title here are the steps on how to calculate overhead for the production cost center. If you still recall the diagram that I've shown you previously, we have 4 steps to consider. The first one is direct allocation, followed by cost apportionment. Okay, so we put in first the items for direct allocation. So direct allocation are the overheads that has already been stated clearly for each of the departments. So in this case, for example, allocated indirect materials is stated in the question that cutting department has incurred 250,000. Finishing department has incurred 999,500 ringgit. Maintenance has incurred 50,000 and the store has incurred nothing on the indirect material. The same goes for your indirect labor, where cutting department has incurred 220,000, finishing has incurred 210,000, maintenance 80,000, and then store is 90,000. Okay. The next step is the cost apportionment. Cost apportionment is where we look for the unallocated overhead, and then we would like to allocate, or we would like to apportion the overhead, 300,000 here for example, for each of the department. So how do we apportion or allocate the 300,000 to each of the department? We use the most suitable basis here. For example, like if you want to apportion the overhead of depreciation, the most suitable basis would be the book value of the sewing machine. And for power expenses, the most suitable basis would be kilowatt, rental would be the floor area, electricity would be the floor area. Okay, and then we look at the usage of each of the department based on the depreciation. For example, like for cutting department, The depreciation, the book value of the machine that they have used is 250,000. And the total book value that the company has on the sewing machine is 600,000. So if cutting department has machine worth 250,000 in its department, therefore the 300,000 out of 300,000, 125 is allocated for the cutting department based on the usage. And for finishing, you take the book value of the machine that finishing department has, and then you should get 100,000, 50,000 for maintenance, and 25,000 for store. Okay, the same method is being applied for overhead power expenses, rental factory, and electricity. So we look at the usage for cutting department on the kilowatt basis. We can see that cutting department has 100,000 kilowatt over the total of 200,000. Therefore, cutting department should have borne 175,000 out of 350,000 of overhead under the power expense. Okay, for rental, we use the floor area. So you can see that cutting department covers 260,000 square feet of the factory out of total of 700,000. Therefore, rental of 180,000, 66,857 ringgit should be borne by the cutting department. So if you calculated your figures and you get in cents, yeah, or in points or in decimal points, it's easy for you to round out everything to the ringgit value, because later on we're going to reapportion the overhead, and by having cent, it will make your calculation much more complicated. Okay, the same treatment will be for the electricity, where we use the floor area. So you can see the basis is similar here compared to the rental of factory. And for the cutting department, they have to bear 102,000, 100,000 for 143 ringgit. Therefore, up until the first two steps, the total overhead for cutting department is 939,000, finishing is 779,000, maintenance is 304,000, and store is 125,500. Okay, next we go to the third steps, which is the reapportionment. This is the step where we would like to transfer the overhead under the service department to the production department. Why would we like to transfer these overhead to production department overhead? To the production departments, because under service department they do not have final product for them to assign the overhead. So we need to assign the overhead to the production which has the final product that they can calculate cost per unit. Okay, so how do we reapportion the overhead for service department to production department? Okay, you can start anywhere. You can start on either on maintenance or on store department. So in this case, I start first with the maintenance department. I would like to transfer 304,000 to the production department. So what will be the most suitable basis of appropriation? For maintenance, the best basis of apportionment should be the service hour. So if a department use more of the maintenance service, then they will have to take more of the maintenance overhead. Okay, so in this case, you can see that cutting department has used 33,600 hours. 33,600 hours of a total 80,000 hours. So we times with 304,000 ringgit. So cutting department bear 127,680 ringgit of maintenance overhead. Okay, and then we apportion to finishing, and then we apportion to store. Okay, so the next step is we would like to apportion the overhead for store. Okay, since maintenance has become 0 here. So when you want to apportion the overhead for store, please do not forget to add in the previous total of 182,500 ringgit. So this plus this, we get 211,380 ringgit. Okay, so what will be the most suitable basis of comparison of appropriation? Basis of appropriation. It would be the number of requests, okay, or number of requisition. So in this case, cutting department has made 188 requisition, of a total of 400 requisition. Okay, so either finishing has to bear 91,316 of total stores overhead. And then the most interesting thing is you can see that maintenance has also made some sort of requisition from store, and then from zero value it has come back to 40,485 ringgit due to the reapportionment of store overhead. So you need to reapportion the maintenance department again using the same basis service hour, and then you reapportion to cutting, to finishing, and to store, and then you can see that store has its overhead once again. And then you reapportion using the number of requisition again and again and again until you can no longer reapportion the overhead for maintenance and store. Okay, so you can see the last reapportionment is 6 and 8 from 14 ringgit of maintenance departments. So you can see the total overhead here is, you add from the beginning throughout the reapportionment. So cutting department has a total overhead of 1,164,998 ringgit. Okay, so the last step in overhead calculation is absorbing the overhead to the final product. So how do we absorb the overhead into the final product? So there are many methods that we can use to absorb the overhead. We can use direct material cost percentage, direct labor cost percentage, prime cost percentage. We can even use the labor hour or the machine hour or the unit of productions. It means that we have the overhead in the lump sum figure. So how do we allocate what is the cost of overhead for each unit that we produce? Okay, so the method of absorption is usually stated in your past years, in the final exam question. They would say that Department A uses direct labor hour to absorb the overhead. So you simply follow the questions. The overhead can be absorbed uniquely for each department, or a company can adopt a single rate or blanket rate where the same method of absorption is used in all departments in a company. So it meant that we can either use unique absorption method for each of the department, or we can use the same absorption method for all department. Okay. The choice of method depends on the requirement in the question. Each department will choose one with the most suitable basis of apportionment. Okay, so we look at the continuation of June 2019. How do we absorb our overhead? So far what we have calculated, we have found out that total overhead for production cutting department is 1,164,998. And the overhead for finishing department is 1,039,502. So how do we allocate these lump sum figure to each of the product that the department has produced? Okay, so in the question, it's already stated that cutting department absorb their overhead using the machine hour, whereas finishing department absorb their overhead using the labor hour. So you simply follow the question. So you can see that the overhead absorption rate for cutting department is 64.72 per machine hour, and for finishing department is 103 ringgit and 95 cents per labor hour. Okay, it means that, let's say that for a cutting department to produce one product, they would require 2 machine hours. Okay, so one product require 2 machine hours. So the overhead that each of the product absorb would be 64 ringgit 72 cent times with 2 machine hours. That is the overhead for the cutting departments. The next thing that you need to understand is the effect of under and over absorption of overhead. So you must know that the one that we calculated previously, the one with the figure 103 ringgit and the one with the 63 ringgit from the cutting department, those figures are only a budgeted figure or an estimated figure. So once the production has commenced, we will get the actual overhead value based on the production that we have done. Okay, now we can compare the overhead that we've calculated, the budgeted one, with the actual value that we obtained to see whether the overhead is under or over absorbed. Okay, the problem with under and over absorbed is that sometimes when you are under absorbed, you will determine your cost per unit to be much lower than what it should be, and therefore when we set the price, the price will be set lower than what it should have been, and we may suffer loss. Okay, but if we are over absorbed, then our cost per unit has been overestimated, which will cause us to set the price, the selling price, much higher than it should be, which will also affect our pricing strategy. Okay, so let's look at some past years. This is the December 2018, question 4A. Okay, the company manufactures a seaweed-based product known as SRC 101. Currently, the company operates with 2 production departments, cleaning and packaging, and 2 service departments, maintenance and store. So you see the second sentence here. The cleaning department is using machine hour, while packaging department is using a direct labor hour in absorbing its production overhead. So this information is useful when you want to absorb your overhead to find the OAR. Okay, so they give you the information in the table where this is the list of overhead list of expenses that they have given you. Okay, but not all of these expenses are overhead. If the expenses are direct expense, then it is not considered to be as overhead. So when you want to calculate the overhead, you only take the indirect expenses. So you take starting from here until downwards. Okay, the above expenses are direct expenses. They are not an overhead. Okay. The question also gives you the basis of apportionment, which you will have to choose later on when you want to allocate or to apportion the. Okay, they also have given you the machine hours and the direct labor hours for you to calculate your overhead rate later on. Okay, they ask you to prepare the overhead analysis sheet, and then they ask you to calculate the predetermined OAR. And then they also ask you to compute the under and over absorption of the overhead for each department using the actual information for the month of December. So this is the actual cost that has incurred for the month of December. Okay, so let's see how we calculate. Okay, they ask you to prepare the overhead analysis sheet. Okay, we start first with direct allocation. Okay, we put in all the direct expenses for the cleaning department, packaging department, maintenance departments, and store department. So the 17,100 are the one that we have stated to be as indirect material. And then we put in the indirect labor accordingly. Okay. And then we'll go to the lump sum figure, the total overhead that we need to apportion, which are the rental factory, electricity, insurance and equipment, supervisory salary. So you need to choose what is the best basis of apportionment for you to allocate the overhead accordingly. So for rental factory, the best basis of apportionment should be the floor area, electricity should be the kilowatt hours, insurance on equipment should be the value of equipment, supervisory salary should be number of employees. Okay, and then you apportion accordingly. This is the working that I have chosen, that I have shown you. Okay, so you should get this figure for each of the department, and then you total up your overhead. Okay, so this is the first step, identifying the direct allocation. Second step is cost apportionment, to apportion the overhead to each of the department. Okay, once you have the total of overhead for each of the department, okay, we need to reapportion, meaning that I need to reapportion this overhead to the production department. Okay, what is the best basic apportionment? If we want to reapportion the maintenance overhead, the best apportionment should be the maintenance hours. And for store, the best basic apportionment should be the number of requisition. Okay, so this is easier because we can see that there is no reapportionment to be made again and again, like the one that we have shown you in the example. Okay, so we reapportion the service department overhead, and we get a total overhead of 130,035 for the cleaning department and 106,355 for the packaging department. So we calculate the OAR using the machine hour for cleaning and labor hour for packaging as per dictated in the question previously. Okay, so you can see that OAR for cleaning is RM5.73 per machine hour, and OAR for packaging is RM3.80 per labor hour. Okay, so and then we need, the question asks you to identify whether the one that we have calculated, the OAR, has been over or under absorbed. Okay, over or under absorbed. So when we want to see, when we want to compare, this is the one that is given to you in the question, the actual overhead income. Okay. Okay, so when we want to absorb the overhead, you need to compare the same level of production. It means that if the actual overhead if the actual overhead has used 30,500 hours of machined, then when you want to compare with the budgeted one, you must also use 30,500 machine hour. Then can you compare with the actual? Okay, you cannot compare budgeted machine hour with the actual machine hour. Then it will be then there's nothing. Then the comparison will be unfair. Okay, so we compare the rate. What we want to compare is the rate. So the level of production should be similar. So that's why we use here actual hours times with the OAR. So based on the actual hour, using the budgeted overhead, we have absorbed 174,765, where we should have absorbed 170,800. So here we have over absorbed. We have over absorbed by 3,965 because we have absorbed 174, where we should have absorbed 170. So for packaging, using the actual hours, 30,000 labor hour, using the budgeted OAR, we have absorbed 114, whereas we should have absorbed 116. So we have under absorbed our overhead by 2,000. So that is the end of overhead chapter. So please do the rest of the questions, and so that you have some question to ask me when we meet during the Google Class Meet. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Wabillahi taufiq wa hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.